Hello, friends.
Welcome to the Liberation Chronicles. I'm Robin Parker.
And I'm Jorge Ceballos. This is another episode of the Liberation Chronicles, a series in which we hope to give voice to liberation in our current historical context and discuss what it means to build a truly inclusive society. Today, we have two special guests, Cater Sparks and Ed Turner, who will help us discuss heterosexism and the lived experience of men who identify as gay or queer.
By way of background about Cater and Ed, I met both men through a men's group that I've been attending for a few years as part of what is called a drop-in group or DIG for gay, bisexual, trans, and queer men that Cater facilitates weekly through the Zoom platform. Here's just some brief background on both Cater and Ed. Since 2019, Cater Sparks has been a certified life coach for men and has founded GBTQ retreats, which are annual retreats for GBTQ men that help participants connect deeper to themselves and the wider community. Cater spent 20 years in New York City as an editor and journalist focused on men's fashion, travel, and design. He has a fashion marketing degree from the American College in London. His styling has been featured in Uda's Style File, the Daily Telegraph, and in Bill Cunningham's section of the New York Times Evening Hours. He was born and reared in Atlanta, where he came out when he was 18 years old. He describes living out and proud as a journey of self-discovery that continues to this day. While he also lived in Charleston, South Carolina, Cater now lives in Atlanta and is happily partnered. I also want to introduce to our audience Ed Turner. Ed moved to Utah in 2017 after retiring from a 32 career at the Supreme Court of the United States as the Deputy Chief of Staff. Shortly before arriving in Utah, he served as the first chair of the board of directors for Flourish Bakery, a nonprofit startup teaching life skills and the art of professional baking to people recovering from substance abuse disorders with a history of incarceration. Ed is also currently serving his second term on the board of directors for the Utah LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce, with plans to open an LGBTQ plus visitor center in Utah in 2027. Ed has always lived socially and economically in the LGBTQ plus community and has brought his full identity to the world as a person living with HIV since 1982. He lives with his husband and their dog Riley. Ed says he enjoys, quote, choosing happiness with a side of snarkiness, close quote. Thank you both for being here.
Pleasure to be
Thanks
here.
for having us.
So we're gonna kick off the conversation, but before we start, Ed, I'm just wondering, and I don't need you to answer. We'll save that for maybe another episode. But I'm just wondering. I'm really curious. I would be really curious to check in with you at some point about what you are thinking about what the Supreme Court is doing these days, since you spent so many years in it. But again, we won't go into that now because we have a different conversation. But it just made me think, wow, you must be having some reaction to what we're seeing the Supreme Court doing these days.
That's definitely a 3 podcast episode.
We'll set it up, Robin. We'll set it up.
We'll definitely set it up. And Cater, who's our friend that's visiting?
This is Arthur. He is my 2-year-old Scottish Terrier who is full of beans, lots of energy, but loves to be in Daddy's lap when he does podcasts. So
Okay.
he's joining us.
Well, we'll welcome him as well.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to we should be asking some questions of him, but we'll figure that out as we go along. So we want to start by checking in with you Both of you are actually the three of you are part of a GBTQ men's group that meets virtually once a week. How long have you been meeting, by the way?
Well, I became a part of the so it used to be a part of a group called Everyman, and Everyman, from what I understand, no longer exists. So we were part of Everyman, and I joined in 2020, and which was it's a mental health, like, wellness group for men.
Mhm.
And they do retreats, they do online groups like this one, and I signed up to run the GBTQ group. And so we've been, I believe all three of us have been in this group since 2020, and we meet once a week, every
What
week, and
once a week
it's
for 5 years?
correct.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So
And as
I'm
we heard
wondering.
yesterday, we've been together for 5 years, and there's so much of our lives that we had no idea about.
That I can see. I years ago I was part of a men's group that I think my memory is fuzzy now, but I think we ended up meeting. Maybe it wasn't once a week. Maybe it was once a month for I think about 5 years or more, maybe. And there was that sort of the relationship that we formed in the group setting. Some of us ended up forming friendships outside of it, but not everyone. So yeah, there was so much that we just didn't know still about each other, right? So that's an interesting. But I'm wondering, for all of you, what drew you to joining and staying with the group? Anyone wants to start?
I'll jump in. Cater's right. I feel like it was about 2020 when I discovered or read an article about this platform, Everyman. And it was sort of in during the pandemic, and I was already doing a lot of um, self-exploration, and for disclosure purposes, I've been in and out of therapy for the past 5 decades, and so my interest in Everyman and this group was purely selfish. I wanted it to complement. I thought maybe it would complement what I was doing and working on elsewhere with my therapist. That I could workshop some things in the group or on the platform and then take it to my therapist and sort of go back and forth. So I looked at it as, I guess, part of my tool belt, my therapeutic tool belt. Um, and what I found was a sense of connection that I really hadn't anticipated,
Mhm.
and friendships. Um, and it's been helpful for me, for the reasons I've just articulated. At the time, I was focusing on my experiences being bullied by straight men. And so I thought, hmm, why don't I just step into the den or that man cave and see let's see where this will go.
Mhm.
Um, but the payoff has been so much more because I have developed really close friendships with men in our Wednesday group. And we have plans after 5 years. Although I have seen them individually while I've traveled, we have plans an organized trip coming up soon. And I'm so looking forward to um, seeing my friends.
Awesome.
What about you, Cater? And Cater, as I mentioned before, has not only been a participant in the dig, but has been our facilitator for that time.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. And I do want to share, now that Every Man is defunct, we've moved the drop-in group to a great new platform called Authenticity Road, and our group is called Lavender Road. We meet every Wednesday at 2, and it's open to the public. So we want more queer men to come join us and drop in and connect. And it's a place to just, we have men who come out, come to ask, what's it like to come out, or I just broke up, my husband and I just divorced, what do we do, or just they want community. So many, as a life coach for men and for queer men, all men are looking for community. There's so
Yeah.
much loneliness in our world.
Yes.
So, and like Ed, I joined Everyman because white straight men were the ones who bullied me my whole life.
Mhm.
So, what better place to join than a group of white straight men who are doing, mental health work? And so, I really leaned into that. And being on these retreats with, you know, co-facilitating a group of 35 straight, mostly straight white men, and seeing them just fall apart and cry and share. And it was really beautiful, and realizing that we're all cut from the same cloth. We all experience the same sadness and shame, and it was really beautiful to build that community. But I'm especially I'm equally thankful as for the GBTQ brotherhood that we've created here in this space.
So it sounds like the sort of the biggest sort of maybe outcome of your time spent. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that you could probably mention as things that you value, but mainly sounds the way you both talked about just being able to build a strong sense of community with other men.
Correct.
Yeah.
I would also add that for me, I came aboard with Everyman, that group, during the pandemic when everybody was locking themselves away, wondering whether we were going to live. And so it was a really important part of staying connected. And similar to what Ed and Cater mentioned, um, it has always been a challenge, at least with some straight men, to build
Mhm.
connections because
Mhm.
heterosexism, homophobia has always been a part of my experience as a gay man. It's something that isn't an impedance, either because, it is a direct impedance. People don't like me because I'm gay, or because of my experience making me feel like, oh, I better be really careful because my motives might be misconstrued. Um, Straight men make friends with each other. They walk up to one another. They say, "Hello, would you like to have a beer? Let's watch the game," and you move forward. Um, Often the motives of gay men in the straight world is question. Oh, am I being
Mhm.
cased? Does this person want to have sex with me? Are they trying to convert me? Will they get a toaster oven if they change me from straight to gay? That kind of thing. But in all seriousness, um, so it was interesting to do that. But when I found the GBTQ dig, it felt a little more like home. Like I didn't have to go through all of the mental gymnastics around letting straight men know that I wasn't a predator, and I could just relax and have conversations.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and one of the things that we do in the group is we do a check-in, and then at the end say, I'm here and I'm in, and that sort of sense of commitment to the group um, just allows me to be who I am and do it without shame or judgment. And I have no plans to leave the group, barring any court order that may come down the road.
Executive order, maybe.
Oh, 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 again, another podcast.
Yeah. All right.
So, Ed, Cater, Ed, what would you say is the problem with heterosexism um, in your own lives, both now and in the past? A huge question, I understand. So, um, but if you had to answer that in general, how would you say that heterosexism, the oppression of gay men, has influenced your life in great ways?
I'm happy to kick it off. I'm 49, and so I came out when I was 18. That was 1993. Terrible with math. No, 1995. And I think that's right when Ellen came out and all that. But yeah, it was the height of the AIDS epidemic, so it was a super scary time. and before the internet, I had no idea, how I could contract AIDS, and all I knew about was condoms, and it was such a scary world. But yet, coming out was so beautiful. It was just the best thing I could have done for myself. So liberating. But and then we went through this period of Obama and all of that, and now here we are again. With the Supreme Court debating conversion therapy right now, and we're just taking steps backwards, backwards, backwards. So I feel like really where it most impacts me is the politics of our nation, which is so scary,
Mm.
and people that I love voting for this and not seeing the implications of hurting me as a family member, me as a friend, my community, people they know and love. So that's really where it affects me these days. I, I Charleston is a small town, but it's pretty liberal. Atlanta, of course, is pretty liberal. I lived in Harlem in New York City, so I've always been in spaces that I felt safe.
Mm.
So I've never, I don't. I've always wondered, like, I always think about like taking a road trip across America, and the first thing I think of is fear. What if I get stuck in some tiny town and they're homophobic? I'm terrified. That does not seem safe to me to take a road trip across America, which
Mm.
is sad to say.
Mm.
Road trip across Europe, no questions asked, be
Mm.
easy breezy, beautiful. But I think that's where it affects me in my life. But all those microaggressions. Like I have friends who are like, they say they're liberal, but they're like, oh, he's not one of those kind of gays, and I'm like, no, 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 that's inappropriate. You know, or I had a friend, this jockey friend of mine, honk at me in the street, and it really scared me. And I was like, you don't understand what you did. Like, you're a straight white jock. Like, you thought that was funny. That's scary to me in a small town. I felt like, is that a MAGA person who wants to run me over? So, just trying to help people understand the bigger picture of being a queer man.
Mm.
As we all know, it's a never ending journey.
What about you, Ed? What do you think
Mm,
about heterosexism and its influence on your life, past and present?
it's so much fun.
Mm.
Um, well, okay. I'm soon to be 66. Um, I don't remember. I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't know that I was different. Um,
Mm.
but I suppose coming out, late teens, um, I never felt I never felt safe in the world.
Mm.
Um, I also, for other reasons, didn't feel safe in my family. Um, which means I never felt safe. Uh, so it was always um, in the 80s, it was risky for me to express my identity openly, to push back against rejection, harassment, stress that I felt that I was choosing, um, and barriers, um, or so I thought. And I think HIV sexism is also a word. So as if my life wasn't going to be difficult enough or a challenge, I added that layer onto it because I seroconverted in the early 80s. But it's made me, both of those, my lived experience, when I look back on the landscape of my life, um, I made choices early on, and um, that's how I was formed. That's where I was formed in 1982, um, choosing to stand up and choosing to rise up, picking my battles, picking my responses, choosing my feelings to circumstances. Um, that became easier over time. And so I have a sense of gratitude in a way for what I went through because I realized I could be a very different person if I had chose differently.
Mm.
Um, but I made choices early on, and that's helped me get through. It's helped me get through my life.
Mhm. And you chose not to be silent. You chose to be out. Why did you choose that?
I think of I call it my formation. My origin point for this is when I was diagnosed. I can remember very clearly a moment where I asked myself a question. Do you want to live? It wasn't important for me to know how I was going to do that, but to simply answer the question. And I answered it in the affirmative, and then set out to navigate life and all of those challenges. And, as Cater has mentioned, the 80s with HIV, horrific. I was thinking just the other day about the stories of, of the coming out of pockets of the administration at the time, rounding up people that had HIV and putting them in concentration camps. The grief, the loss, fear, overwhelming. But I made hard choices about how I was going to respond to things, and that I was going to put myself first, that I wasn't going to edit my life, and just be open about it and take it as it comes.
Thank you for that. And Cater, same question for you. You came out relatively young, 18. Why did you decide to come out and be open at a relatively young age, do you think?
Drugs. I was a member of the rave scene, and it was the most beautiful experience of my life. As someone who never felt like I had a community, to grow my hair out in pigtails and listen to Delight and house music and wear fat pants and baby tees and put glitter on and take ecstasy and acid and mushrooms and all these things, and go to these parties where it was just a whole family, just truly, just this amazing chosen family, which we didn't even have that word back then. And I'm still friends with them to this day. One of my raver friends sold me this house, 30 years later, and we still get together. And RuPaul said this one time, like, I never had a bad drug experience. Like, I don't do it anymore, but I never had a bad one. Never regret it. It was all amazing. It was all beautiful. It was mind expanding and um, just a beautiful part of my life. And I was like, what am I holding back? And also, that was a space where I grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta. I didn't have a place to go and make out with, meet guys. How did I know I was gay unless I made out with a guy? So I went to a rave and took some ecstasy and made out with 15 men on the floor of a warehouse. And I was like, yep, this is it. And came home on spring break and came out to my parents, and they were, they were wonderfully accepted. My whole family was, which I'm so thankful for. Um, but but they were scared, and it wasn't for years until my mom told me that. But when I came out to my mom, she thought I was going to get engaged to a girl I'd been dating, and I said, no, I'm we broke up and I'm gay. And she said, well, at least some bitch ain't getting my goddamn jewelry. I just thought that was so funny, and we laughed and laughed and laughed. And I posted on Facebook for like National Coming Out Day, like maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And she says, why I said that is because I was so scared you were going to die. She said, I was so terrified of you dying that I had to say something funny or I was going to lose my shit. And just to hear that 15, 20 years later was such a, just a shift in my understanding of my coming out experience and their, what they were grappling with. So, but yeah, I never looked back. I went back to college. I felt like I had rose tinted glasses on. The world was just a whole new place. I was out. I was proud. Went to gay pride marches in the 90s, and it was beautiful. And I've never regretted it, of course.
Can I jump in with something which is to dovetail on what Cater just said? In my life, it's been so important for people to see me for who I am. And knowing that I have the work to do is mine. And so maybe as a point of explanation, when I was told I was HIV by my doctor at the time, I was told I had 4 to 6 months to live. And, I was in my early 20s and thought, oh, well, okay, well, I'll just go out with a bang. So I did, I just lived it up. And about the maybe seventh or eighth month mark, I sort of picked my head up and went back in for a follow-up appointment and told my doctor that he was fired. Because he told me I'd had 4 to 6 months, and look, here I am, 8 months out. And he seemed a little bit confused. And I said, well, I've realized that I realized a couple of things. First, you're just practicing medicine. And I gave up my agency. And that won't happen again. So I adopted this, at that moment, this sort of self-reliant attitude that has helped me cope with challenging assumptions and reframing negative experiences for the past 4 decades. And I've gotten to this place because I've built strong relationships, many of them in my men's group, and engaged in communities where I'm valued. And I don't waste time on things that are not fulfilling for me. And that includes heterosexism.
Wow. Staying then with that topic, even though Ed, you just said I don't I don't waste time worrying about it, but we want to dig a little bit more in terms of how living under a system of heterosexism uh, has had an impact. What are some ways, maybe less obvious, maybe we could say like quiet ways, in which heterosexism plays out, and how do they impact your well-being? And I'm actually now thinking, your response right now in terms of that conversation with your doctor, that may have been one of those things, right? Where the man, as you said, he was just practicing medicine the way he knew how to do it, and yet, right, there was, I'm assuming that maybe the doctor was heterosexual, uh, and the way he would understand what you were going through would be so different if it hadn't been framed by this lens, right? Anyway, so what are some examples maybe that both of you might have about the less obvious or quiet ways in which heterosexism plays out?
I have 2 triggers that I am uniquely aware of.
Mhm.
And it's probably why my therapist has a second home. Uh, One is when I am with someone, I describe it as watching the garage doors drop behind their eyes. Yes, there, that is one. The other is when I meet a couple and at some point I sense that the man has figured out or assumed or thought that I'm gay, and he drifts away, leaving his wife or his girlfriend or his mistress or whoever it is he brought to the social gathering there to talk to me and to do all the work. And that's both of those I don't tolerate very well. As Cater may remember, I'm visiting him in Charleston. He's kind enough to invite me to an event, a birthday party, where we were separated at a table and had a lovely evening. And when it was over, asked me, I didn't know anyone other than Cater, and it was a fun, engaging evening. And he's just checking in at the end and how'd it go? And I said, well, I had a very interesting conversation with explaining my connection to you in the men's group with a woman, and she wanted to know more and more about my experience. And so I told her this one particular trigger. And she said, "Well, what is it you would say?" And I said, "Oh, I plan to talk to your husband after dinner." So um, I, I gave her a preview, and the conversation I had with him is, don't do that.
Mm, mm,
Don't leave because you're uncomfortable. Don't like why do you do that? And why did you leave your wife to engage me when you could have stayed? And what's at risk for you for staying? To find out that we're actually have a lot in common,
mm,
because frankly,
mm,
I see
mm,
myself in you, and
mm,
I think there's an opportunity for you to see yourself in me, but you chose otherwise.
mm.
Ed, by way of clarification, um, you said when you see the garage doors close behind someone's eyes, could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that, as different from, the husband is just leaving, blah blah blah?
Well, it's another form of checking out,
Mm.
Mm, mhm,
right? So I sort of watch the person as if they're thinking. I mean, I don't know what they're thinking. I do my best not to make up stories about somebody without just asking them directly, but sort of leaves me with this, they're just not present. And I'm not here to do their work for them.
mhm,
So there's the rub, because I want to have a boundary around things. But there they are in front of me. And what do I do? And it's varied. I mean, sometimes I address it, sometimes I just let them go, and because I
yeah,
don't want to make the time for it.
yeah.
Mm. Gotcha.
It's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It's exhausting.
Well, on that note, I think I sometimes I'll do the opposite. I was at a cocktail party the other night with two of my neighbors, couples, and one of the straight men who I love. He's liberal, he's cool, but he started talking to me about something, and I just got really uncomfortable. And I guess maybe it was a difficult conversation. I don't remember what it was, but I just kind of drifted off, and I felt more comfortable talking with the women about redoing their house, and then the two men went to the library and were cackling about something and having bourbon. And they're both super liberal, fun men, but for some reason, I got intimidated. And I think it would have been curious on reflection to be like, I feel awkward. I don't know why. I do around you. I need to lean into that. And um, what can we talk about that would be interesting together or something like that, because I'd like to get to know him better. And I was kind of embarrassed that I did that. But also, I think, like what Ed said, sometimes I'm just tired. I just want to go talk to the girls about redoing their house. I was an interior design writer. They love connecting with me about all that. We talk a lot about that in our group of sometimes we're just tired. I don't want to tell the woman at the grocery store that I'm buying this soup for my boyfriend. I want to just say I'm buying it for my partner or whatever, because they said, "Oh, you're making a beautiful dinner for your wife." Do I need to say, "Actually, I'm gay and it's my boyfriend," or "Yes, she's gonna be thrilled." We're always coming out as we talk about in our dropping group.
And for me, what's under it is rejection.
Hmm.
Yeah, it couldn't be any more simple. And
Mhm,
um, I get to choose what I know to be true. And this is thanks to therapy and some ayahuasca. Um,
Ooh, another
uh,
topic. Another topic to go into.
um, uh, yeah, how I choose to respond to that once I identify that that's what it is, and that's taken me years to get there.
Mhm,
That I can tie something to rejection, and I also know my origin point for that, which is um, on one hand innocuous perhaps to some, but for a seventh grade boy who knew he was gay, who was anxious about applying to a private high school, asking a math teacher who I respected deeply to write a letter of recommendation, so that as part of my application process. And the response I got was very quietly,
Mm.
um, no, you're not going to get in, and you're never going to amount to anything.
Wow. Wow.
And that, I suppose, is one of those. It's a quiet example only because she was whispering it.
Mm.
But I had a choice to respond to. I had a choice as to how I could respond to that, as really a kid, but as someone who knew I was attracted to boys, even though I didn't understand it at the time, and that I was going to be going to an all-male high school.
Mm.
Um, it does explain why I'm an overachiever, because that's how I chose to respond to that, by proving her wrong. Um, and then I thought it sort of drifted into the ether of my experience, and it took me years to understand that it was actually a driving force to
Mm.
explain to myself who I am as a gay man in this straight world. Bless her heart.
Mm.
Well, I just have to ask the obvious question. So, how much rage lies between underneath having something like that happen to you?
Um, I I can put myself back there. In the moment, I was more shocked because I had an image. Here's the irony. I had a perception or an image of who this person was,
Mm.
and that's not who they were.
Mm.
Um, and so I sort of think in the moment I had a task to do, so I dismissed it. I did not tell my parents about it because I was too embarrassed. Um, and I'm sure I felt some shame, um, but got into, when I got out of high school is when I started therapy, and that was one of the first things that's one of the first things we looked at.
Okay.
It does, it does explain to me in on one level why I choose to rise up and stand up for myself.
Hmm. Thank you for that.
Well, and did you ever send her a picture of you with the Supreme Court justices?
It's um, in preparing for this ayahuasca retreat I went to, um, I found my old yearbook, and I'll be damned if she didn't sign it.
Mm.
And I remembered, and she signed it with, a typical platitude. And then I remembered something that I had camouflaged for obviously decades, where I went to her, um, and said, why did you do that? Why did you sign this way? She'd say, oh, I always knew you were going to get in. I
Wow.
always,
Wow.
and um, again, that experience was on many levels confusing and also clarifying
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for
Mm.
me.
Mm.
Um, but I do think, in my own way, um, I'm grateful I chose to respond that way, because it could have been, it could have been a disaster, for me. I could have had a very different life.
So, uh, knowing Robin, if he has stayed in this group for 5 years, it means that he's been able to come with all of Robin. You know, Robin is not hiding. Right. Which means that the conversation about race, I know, must have taken place uh, in your setting. So I am wondering, Ed and Cater, in what ways do you see your whiteness creating a very distinct experience for both of you that is different from what you probably have learned at this point about what it means to be gay and black, or gay and brown, or gay and Asian in this society?
Dun 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 dun.
Oh, I see we're out of time.
Like, oops, gotta go. You look at that.
Look at that.
I
Cater, take it away.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, listen, we have a privilege, and it's, sad but true. And every time I get pulled over by the cops and I get off with a warning, I say, white privilege, like, would that have happened to a black queer man,
Mhm,
um, or a Latino, but, my thing is just, it's such a, social justice is such a huge part of my life.
mhm,
And especially, like, I just learned so much during Black Lives Matter of, one of the biggest things friends of mine would say, and we talked a lot about it, of course, in our group discussions in our dig of, if you are in a room as a white man with other people who are saying something problematic, you need to stand up, because black people are not in that room, and
mhm,
black people are not in that space to
mhm,
say, hey, let's think about what you just said. And so that's really become my passion of, like, if I am in a room, I mean, good or bad, I'm not in those rooms that often where someone says something problematic. Often it's family members that I'm like, hey, actually, XYZ, why are you thinking that?
mhm,
Like, let me explain. My trans friends, my black friends, my dreamer friends, like, you've been to the thrift store I used to work at in Charleston, like, all these people. I was executive director of We Are Family, and we had a queer thrift store. And, my family met all these queer, trans dreamers, immigrants. And so I'm like, how could you say that about those people? You like them. So that's been a big thing for me, is being the voice in the room of, to stand up for minorities,
mhm,
because, and whether it's in an actual room, or it's on the, I'm not a keyboard warrior at all, but if there's something I do feel like I need to share online, or where I put my money where my mouth is for the charity, or marching with, at Black Lives Matter. I was at every protest in Charleston. I want to support, the people that I love. And so I think that, as white folks, we really need to lean into. And I hope more white folks see that. And, it's exactly where we are right now, with, everything happened in our nation.
mhm.
I saw a bunch of white guys in Portland, fishing for ice fishing, and they had fishing rods with donuts on them, and they were throwing them
Right.
at the ice. I mean, brilliant. And that was a bunch of white guys who are not going to get arrested and not going to be deported, but good for them for standing up for the immigrants in their community. We need more of that.
Thank you.
I have take a similar tack. Uh, I want to understand that, like myself, who is broken and hurt and fearful, that is a human experience.
Mm,
And when I am in the presence of a comment or an action, um, my initial question is, why did you say that?
mm,
Or why did you do that? Um, and depending on how that conversation goes, um, I weigh a decision as what the next step is going to be, and it's often asking the person, "What happened to you?"
mm, mm,
'Cause there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with me, but something happened to me as a child.
mhm,
Um, they likely had their own experience, and so um, I choose to engage it with questions as
mhm,
opposed to statements.
mhm,
You know,
mhm,
you shouldn't, and that none of that ever. I learned a long, long time ago um, that it's about the person, and that give them something to think about.
mhm.
I'm just leave them with something to think about. themselves. And standing up, I'm not going to tolerate this.
Yeah.
This is wrong.
Yeah.
This is wrong.
Hmm.
I'd also add that, of course, Jorge was right. Jorge knows me well in that regard. It's like that there's no way that I could form a relationship with anyone if I couldn't really speak honestly about all of my experience, including the experience of race and what that has been about. And of course, Ed rolls his eyes when I mention that each time, but that's okay. Um, but in all,
I'm rolling. It's from a loving
it's
place
from a
in a
it's from a
relationship.
loving place, right? But they've stepped forward, in ways that are not common for white guys, and not necessarily common for white gay men either,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like um, being a member of an oppressed group does not necessarily make one good around issues of race or ethnicity or anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
It takes some practice. It
Yeah.
takes some wanting to do that. And so, of course, I checked both of these men out in that regard. And, they can sit in the cauldron of different racial experiences without flinching. And that's not an easy thing to do. I have great respect for them because of that.
Thank you, Robin.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So I want to now move the conversation maybe away from the individual realm and look at institutions.
Hmm.
So in your experience, what role did institutions such as families, schools, religious organizations, and corporations play in reinforcing or challenging heterosexism?
Yeah.
I'm happy to jump in and say, I was lucky to grow up in a liberal church. It was Disciples of Christ, which is it's a derivative of Episcopalian. So it was always a loving, warm place. There was never any hell and brimstone. Um, but I think, these days it's politics. I mean,
Mm,
the country we
mm,
live in is ripping out rainbow crosswalks and firing people who put pride flags on their desks. So it's just terrifying.
mhm.
And are we going to be, put in concentration camps? I don't know. We've, they just raided a whole apartment building and took naked kids out into the street at 3 a.m. Even if they weren't illegal immigrants, and
Mhm.
even if they were, why? What are we doing? So our nation's on fire, and it's really scary. And I'm thankful. I think I said this. I was in another group. I'm thankful for social media because so much of it is being caught on tape.
Right.
People are seeing this. People are not standing up for it. Alaska just had their first Democratic mayor win in like 20 years or something. Um, I think some of this, I hope, is going to change the tide. But I think that's the biggest place of fear is our nation and our politics. And it's just so horrifying that that's where we are. Um, and Trump is always like, oh, I don't, all these gay men who are in the New York Times just had that whole huge article about all the gay men in Trump's circle, which I just say, big flashing red lights, internalized homophobia,
Mm,
you know,
mhm.
but bless, I did a reel on Instagram, like anyone who knows them, give them my number. I'm happy to be their life coach because those boys need some help. Uh, Bless their hearts, to
Yeah.
think that what they're doing is okay and they can go to sleep at night and with a smile on their face. I'm sure they're most. I've always said every night. I'm sure Trump goes to bed crying, but that's for me. That's where it is. I was lucky enough to grow up in a school. I grew up in Atlanta, which is predominantly black. My public school was half black, half white, half Jewish. So as a white Christian, I was a minority, and it was just amazing. We just had our 30th reunion, and it was magic. So I feel lucky in the
Mm,
spaces I've been able to
right.
grow up that I felt safe.
Hmm.
Mm,
My experience, and this is giving me a moment to remember. I grew up in a small town. It was an island
mhm,
north of Boston, and I remember as a kid just thinking, oh, I have to get over that bridge. I have to get out. I have to get over that bridge. And when I was after college, when I was in Washington, I came home with the purpose of going to talk to the priest in the church that my family attended, Roman Catholic, very strict. And my parents were against my going to speak to the priest. And yet I went, yet I persisted. And so what the conversation was, my opening line was, I'm gay, I have HIV, what is my place in the church? And his response could best be summed up with, you know, God loves you, you're welcome here, but you cannot practice homosexuality. And my response to that was, that's like saying I can come to church and not pray. And so my parents were horrified that this whole, they were like, we told you it was going to end badly. And I said, it didn't end badly. It didn't end badly for me. It's quite clarifying, actually. I'm out. I'm out. And as Cater has pointed out, I'm feeling like heterosexism is now a matter of public policy and in this country. And I have to push back, as exhausted as I might be. I will find the time and the energy to push back where I can and stand up where I can. And likely it'll be, sort of one-on-one, which is really, has been my experience. I don't have a platform. I can't change the world, but I can change my corner of it and be impactful.
We would like to thank our guests, Ed Turner and Cater Sparks, for making this such a great episode. Be sure to check out the links to Cater's coaching, retreats, and contact information in the description section of this episode. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care.